The word of the Lord. There was a lot in the news this summer about college students and the amount of debt that they were taking on while in school. Now, it used to be that college was much more affordable, and if a student got a decent summer-paying job, they could about make enough money to pay for the next year of school. But the colleges have wanted to grow some and start a new program and add a new building and pay the faculty a little more. And so they raised tuition 3% or 4% from one year to the next. But the problem is that 3 or 4%, if you do it year after year after year, that adds up. And college is just darn expensive. Now, private schools have always cost more, but just to let you know, public universities, like the University of Florida, this year costs over $21,000 for an in-state student who's living in the dorms. Now, you multiply that times 4, and you about could buy a house for that. So as a result, many students have to borrow money to get through school, and they end up, some, with a lot of debt. Now, they know who they owe. They owe the government who's lent them that money, or they owe a bank who's lent them that money. But does anyone owe them? I'm sure you've asked a friend for a favor. Help me move this heavy furniture. Let me use your truck to tote some stuff around. And you know that when you're done with that project, now you owe them one. And that someday they'll ask you for a favor. And when they ask, they don't expect you to be busy that day. They expect you to help because you owe them one. Well, today's passage is about something like this. It's about owing debts. After we give our life in service to God, does God owe us one? The passage starts with the disciples responding to what Jesus had told them about forgiveness. They're asking him to increase their faith because what he's asked for just sounds impossible. Jesus corrects them and says, if they had the faith of a small grain of a tiny little mustard seed, they could move a sycamine tree. A sycamine tree is a kind of mulberry. And apparently has a root system that's so intricate that according to the rabbis at the time, it would take 600 years to untangle one. A little aside, I was at a funeral once, and in the middle of the funeral service, someone's phone starts ringing, and the ringtone is Cheeseburger in Paradise. And this poor woman is fumbling in her purse to get this out, and when she gets it out, then it gets louder. So we thought maybe that was some message from the great beyond. I don't know. No. Getting back to the mulberry. So the thought of this mulberry uprooting itself and planting itself in the sea, well, that's a powerful image for the disciples to hear. We should also remember that the custom at the time was to use language in the most vivid way possible. So that what he's saying about the mulberry is telling us that even when things look completely impossible, it can be possible if we approach it with faith. It's a reminder to not give up on God, that miracles can happen. Think of all the scientific breakthroughs we've had, of all the medical treatments and medicines and surgeries that just a few decades ago we would have thought impossible, but now are routine. My major professor in graduate school told me this story about his family. 1969, his grandmother was quite old, and she'd seen a lot in her lifetime. 2 world wars, the Great Depression, And she'd also seen a lot of great things. When she was born, the Wright brothers had not yet flown. And yet in her lifetime, she went from no one ever having been in the air to that evening when her grandson, the guy who would later become my professor, woke her up and told her, "Look, Grandma, people are walking on the moon." That had to be quite amazing for her. Almost an impossibility. We can all say, it can't be done. And if we approach it with that attitude, it won't be done. But if we approach a situation with the attitude, it must be done, then the chances are that it will be. But we must always remember that we approach no task alone, and that God is with us with all his power. Jesus reminds the disciples that they are to be servants of God, and that as such they have certain duties. In those days, a master usually owned the servants and would pull rank on them and tell them what to do. And there are times when it's essential to pull rank and tell folks what to do. If you're out on a boat with young children, you tell them to put on the life vests. It's not a request. That's an order. They may protest, but parents don't mind being a dictator when it comes to child safety. You tell them, wear your life vest. Jesus is giving this kind of command to his disciples, but it's about the subject of forgiveness. Your capacity to forgive the same person 7 times each and every day is a key to survival. Your survival. If you don't forgive, it's going to cost you physically. The stress of carrying around anger can cause a person to die prematurely. Doctors tell us that there's medical evidence that anger and resentment can lead to migraines, cardiovascular diseases, excuse me, like high blood pressure, heart attacks, and strokes. So our health is directly related to our ability to forgive. Well, does it start then with the person coming up to us and asking for forgiveness? No. What's interesting about what Jesus said is that the sincerity of the person who is asking for forgiveness has nothing to do with our ability to forgive. We have probably all had somebody in our lives come and apologize to us about something that they've done. But even as they're saying it, you know they don't really mean it. But Jesus says for us to forgive that person, not for their sake, but for our sake. Or we need to forgive someone that comes from a close personal place. There's a need to forgive our worst enemy, ourselves. What if we discover that the worst offender, the very enemy itself, is within us? As that old comic strip Pogo wisely told us many years ago, I have met the enemy, and he is us. We need to forgive ourselves. We need to live on that level of forgiveness. We need to do it for basic survival. Maybe that's who we owe it to. We owe it to ourselves to do that. We're reminded, and the mulberry is an example of it, that faith is the greatest force in the world. We owe so much to God. In return, we can live lives of faith, forgiveness, and do good works. And if we do, does that mean that God owes us one? No. We can never put God in our debt. We can never say, he owes us one. When we have done our best, when we have done our duty, we have only done what we were supposed to do. As the old hymn says, were the whole realm of nature mine, that were an offering far too small. Love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all. If we were to write a contract, a binding agreement between two people, we can fulfill the terms of the contract and pay back any claims that are set forth in it. But in a spiritual matter, we can never pay back what has been given to us. God claims us with his love. It's not because he owes us, but because he loves us. And because of that, we owe him. Don't make forgiveness and gratitude a rarity. Give thanks. Forgive one another. Forgive yourself. And praise God. In the name of the Father, and the Son,